Morning. Today is Friday. It's Yud Aleph Nissen, the Rebbe's birthday. Tovshin Ayin Daled. We are in the Rebbe's Mamar of Achron Shal Pesach Tovshin Yud Beis in Teres Menachem Sefer Mamar Tovshin Yud Aleph Tovshin Yud Beis. In the Mamar of Kimei Tzeischo Meretz Mitzrayim, page Reish Samach Ches. We are up to the word Elo, the paragraph beginning with the word Elo. The Rebbe here, in chapter 5 in Ois Hey, is explaining the difference between miracles, or rather the maila, the qualitative advantage that miracles that are clothed in nature possess, and then on the other hand also the qualitative advantage that the miracles that defy nature possess. And he explained it in 2 points: in the way the miracle occurs and in the miracle itself. So far as miracles that clothe themselves in nature, the way the miracle occurs is that it, as I just said, clothes itself in nature. It doesn't break nature, and therefore, in that sense, it's more closely linked to the constancy that we find within nature. Because a miracle is the idea of the revelation of an infinite divine light, right? Nature is finite, therefore the godly energy, the godly life force that's within nature is correspondingly finite. A miracle is a revelation of God's infinite light, right? But how does it make itself known? How does it make itself present in a miracle that clothes itself in nature? By clothing itself in nature. So it's not something which is beyond it completely. So in that sense, like I said, it's more closely linked to the constancy within nature. Where do you see the miraculous, more of the revelation of the miraculous aspect in a miracle that clothes itself in nature? It's in the miracle itself, in the sense that what is revealed is that Hashem's infinite light, which is normally transcendent, does not clothe itself in nature, cannot clothe itself in nature, doesn't clothe itself in nature, rules on nature to an extent that what? That the nature itself behaves in accordance to Hashem's will, doesn't break it. In miracles that defy nature, you also have 2 qualities which seem to be superior to miracles that clothe themselves in nature. A, in terms of the miracle is revealed. You see it in front of your eyes. So in terms of its revelation, you see it in front of your eyes. And then also the fact that what? That it defies nature, it breaks nature. In a certain sense, even though we said there is a qualitative advantage in clothing, in a godly energy clothing itself in nature, to the extent that what? That it works with nature. But nevertheless, in a certain sense, when a godly energy defies nature, in that sense, let's call it the wow factor, is greater in the miracle that defies nature. But we have a small issue, which is the fact that the Rebbe mentioned that miracles that clothe themselves in nature come from a higher source. Right? That when it's a miracle that the Baal HaNes is not aware that the miracle is occurring with him, it comes from a level called levadei, from a higher level. So if we say now that what? That a miracle that defies nature is the revelation of the unlimited element itself, so it would seem that a miracle that clothes itself in nature, as the Rebbe said, the miracle that clothes itself in nature is from a level of the unlimited which gives room for the limited, and therefore it can clothe itself in nature when it makes itself revealed, when it becomes revealed. Whereas a miracle that defies nature is from a level that leaves no room, gives no room for the finite and for the limited. So it would seem that that's greater. And we learned in the beginning of the Maimah that what? that a miracle that clothes itself in nature is rooted higher. How does that work? So, to a certain extent, the Rebbe is going to explain it here. That's where we're up to Ella. Ella Sha'afal Pikein. Nevertheless, despite the fact that the Rebbe just explained that what? That a miracle that defies nature, leaves no room for the finite, for the limited, unlike unlike a miracle that clothes itself in nature. The Rebbe goes back and says there is a qualitative advantage in miracles that clothe themselves in nature. So the Rebbe is going to add an element here to what he said before. It is specifically in miracles of this type, miracles that clothe themselves in nature, that what is revealed is Hashem's rulership on the mode of nature itself. It's a miracle. It doesn't now become the nature of the world to behave in this way. It is a miracle. But it causes nature to conspire, as it were, or to behave in a way that the unlimited divine energy wants. The Rebbe is going to bring now an example which will make it a little clearer. V'yashleimer, says the Rebbe, she'achiluk shebein shnei sugi hanisim, shebein shnei hasugim denisim, the difference between these two types of miracles, which two types? The miracle that defies nature, and the miracle that clothes itself in nature. It's similar to the difference between the nullification of Yechudei Ilah, the upper unity, and the nullification of the acceptance of the yoke. What does that mean? The bittul of Yechudei Ilah means somebody perceives that Hashem is the only one that exists. So you're talking about someone who perceives that Kula Kamei Kalachshev, everything before Hashem is like naught. Bittul of Kabbalah Soil means I feel myself. My ego is intact. And the feeling that Enid Muvada is distant from me. Right? And nevertheless, I accept Hashem's yoke, I accept Hashem's authority, and I do what I have to. Imagine someone who's in the presence of a king and understands the greatness of the king, or perceives the greatness of the king, and is overcome with tremendous awe and a sense of nothingness, and he faints. So what happened? Yes, the greatness of the king had a tremendous impact on him, but what did it cause him to do? It caused him to faint. Cause them to expire. What does that mean? It means that the bittul, the point that it makes over here is like this. It means that the bittul, the nullification of the person in this sense, is connected to the ego of the person. It's the sense that he perceives the greatness of the king that causes him to faint. So the emphasis is on the he. Even though you look at it and you say he fainted. So the king's greatness had this unbelievable impact on him. But why? Because it's the him. He faints. When you talk about Kabbalah's oil, what you see in someone who accepts the yoke of Hashem and does what Hashem wants, notwithstanding the fact that his ego remains intact, it's more the emphasis on Hashem. My ego is intact, and I would rather do something else, and nevertheless I do what Hashem wants. So what is more dominant here in terms of the bittul? The Hashem aspect. That is the bittul of Yechudei Ilah, the nullification of the upper unity we just mentioned, like the person that faints, that's like miracles that defy nature, that break nature. The bittul of Kabbalah's oil is what? Is like miracles that clothe themselves in nature. That it's from such a high level that it could impact the person, even someone whose ego remains intact. Why is that? Because it comes from a higher place. Let's see how the Rebbe says it inside. The fact that before the revelation of God's infinite light, nature becomes nullified from its existence. In other words, it loses its normal pattern of behavior, which is, in a nutshell, is nisim shelamayla ma'ateva, miracles that define nature and that are higher than nature. Well, this is similar to the nullification of Yechudei Ilah, of the upper unity. Someone who perceives Yechudei Ilah, bitul b'metzias, which means the person expires. Where does this bittul come from? From someone who contemplates the kula kemek lachshiv, that everything before Hashem is like a mot. So that is what, like miracles that define nature. And in the case where nature remains intact, and nonetheless, despite the fact that it remains that nature remains intact, nevertheless, it behaves not according to the rules and the characteristics of nature, but rather like what? Like Hashem wants, which is in a nutshell what? Another way of saying miracles that clothe themselves in nature. So that is well that's similar to the nullification of the acceptance of Hashem's yoke. The hagam that despite the fact that the person remains intact, his ego remains intact, the ad to the extent not only does his ego remain intact, but it's not only that he is intact, but on the contrary, even more so, he would rather be doing something else. He would rather be doing the opposite. A slave would rather be free, without the yoke. And nevertheless, his actual conduct, in actual fact, is not according to his desire, but rather like the desire of the master. That is the metaphor for what? For Nisim Amla Bashim B'Teva. And how is that? Where does that come from? That's because, even though, as mentioned before, this is a level of unlimitedness, which gives room for gvul, which gives room for the finite and for the limited. Hence, nature remains intact and is not defied and not broken apart, not shattered. Nevertheless, it's still a miracle, and the reason why, notwithstanding its own characteristics, it behaves in accordance to Hashem's will, that's because essentially that level of the unlimited aspect of Hashem is higher than the root of miracles that define nature. Those are the vot. Now the Rebbe goes on and says like this, chapter 6. It's known the Rebbe now articulates the difference between the bittul, the two types of bittul. Which one is the truer, the more real bittul? It would seem on the surface that somebody that faints and expires because of the greatness of Hashem, that's the real bittul. Whereas somebody that remains intact is a lesser bittul, right? Says the Rebbe, no. It's known that the qualitative advantage in the nullification which emanates from this level of Yichudei Allah, the upper unity, the celestial unity, somebody that perceives the Einod Muvade, the Kula Kemek Lachshiv, right? That everything before Hashem is not. So the bittul that emanates from that, what happens in that type of bittul? The nullification penetrates the person's entire being, entire existence. There isn't left by him and in him any aspect of his personality, of his existence, that is not nullified. Unlike the nullification which emanates from the acceptance of Hashem's yoke, where the nullification is only insofar as what? His actual conduct. But in terms of his emotions, in terms of his intellect, in terms of his entire personality, that remains intact, as we just said, right? So that is the quality, that qualitative advantage in the bittul of Yichudei Allah over the bittul of Kabbalah Soil. But the bittul Kabbalah Soil, he bittul atzmi. The quality, the special quality that we find in the nullification of the acceptance of Hashem's yoke is in the bittul itself. What does that mean? Shehu bittul amiti. It's a true bittul. She'einei kosher mitzias shel adam. It's not connected to the existence or the ego of the person. So in terms of how far the bittul penetrates and affects, that you find where in the bittul of Yichudei Allah, right? But it's not as true a bittul as the bittul of Kabbalah Soil, because what happens? You see, you could be also, even though it's bittul b'metzias, but what's bittul b'metzias? It's the existence, the ego of the person that's bottled. When a person's metzias ego remains intact, his personality remains intact, and nonetheless he behaves in accordance to Hashem, in that sense, it's a truer bittul. Why? It's a true bittul which is not connected to the existence of the being, to the ego of the person. When we talk about the bittul, the nullification of Yichudei Allah, can make a luxury. Why does he faint? Why does he expire? Because he recognizes and he feels that everything before Hashem is not. So there is a recognition. There is a feeling. It's just that it affects him in a way that what? That he expires. So in this scenario, the nullification is connected to the existence of the person, to the person's ego. His recognition. The person's recognition. So therefore, it's not a true nullification. But when we talk about the nullification, when somebody accepts the yoke of Hashem, when he accepts upon himself to fulfill Hashem's will, even when this will of Hashem opposes his own will, and nevertheless he accepts it, and nevertheless he fulfills it. Similar to a slave, a servant, who is compelled, who is forced to fulfill the master's will. So what's the idea of this bittul, in other words? That he pays no attention. He doesn't concern himself with his own existence, with his own ego. What difference does it make? What I want, what I don't want? It's got nothing to do with me. It's the master's will, it's Hashem's will, and I fulfill it. So in that sense, it is a true nullification. Another couple of lines, we'll just finish the ois. We could say, so going back, this is a metaphor for the two types of miracles. Similarly, the Rebbe says, when it comes to miracles that clothe themselves in nature. Although the nullification of nature before Hashem's infinite light, in this type of miracle, in miracles that clothe themselves in nature, is only insofar as what? In the way in which nature behaves. But it doesn't actually affect nature in its essence because nature remains intact. It doesn't break nature. So you would think that what? That this is a lower level. Mikol Mokim says the Rebbe, nevertheless, since insofar as the rules and the characteristics of nature, there is no room for nature to behave in a miraculous way. There are contradictions in terms, essentially. And the change that occurs as a result of this itself making itself present, being revealed, as a result of that, it causes the conduct of nature to behave differently. Why? And what is revealed is that Hashem's infinite light is so great that He rules on nature to such an extent that nature now behaves in its way. It behaves in the way Hashem's infinite power wants, notwithstanding that its characteristics remain intact, like the bittul of Kabbalah Soil. So therefore, the nullification of nature before Hashem's infinite light in this type of miracle is a true bittul. Why? Because it remains intact. So nature defies itself. Nature wants to behave in a certain way. Hashem's itself reveals itself and says to nature, behave in accordance to my will, and nature complies. So it's a truer bittul because what does bittul mean? You're bottled before that which is greater than you. So you set yourself aside. So if I faint, or if I'm overcome, or if the system is broken or crashes, what does that mean? So in other words, it's not a truer bittul. So dafke in a situation where the characteristics remain intact, and notwithstanding the fact that they normally cannot behave differently, they do. That points to a greater, deeper bittul, which must mean that it's rooted in a higher source. Okay, we'll stop over here and continue this show on Sunday. We'll have a shiur on Sunday. Are we still on for Sunday? Or should we? Should we leave it till after Pesach?
I think so.
Okay. Continue after Pesach, Mr.